ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ambiguous Podcast Solution. This is another fun one for me. My name is Will Tarashuk, the host, the founder, and the COO of Ambiguous Podcast Solution. But today I am talking to a conservationalist. I hope I said that right. Someone who wants to conserve the wild. Jason Crighton. He is the founder and CEO of Conserve the Wild, which is a non-for-profit, as well as the host of the Conservation Unfiltered podcast, which is your award-winning destination for all things conservation. Join the host, Jason Crighton, as he discusses a wide range of topics within the conservation community. Of course, all unfiltered. So, Jason, welcome to the show, man. This is very exciting. I'm very happy to talk to a conservationalist, someone who's actually doing something with meaning.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate it. And don't sell yourself short, because whenever you explain my sort of tag for my podcast, it sounds so much better coming out of your face than it does mine.
You know, it always sounds better. Someone's like, oh, here's Will. He's been podcasting since 2015. I'm like, oh my God, I have. It's just like, it sounds a lot better coming from someone else than it does from me. But we're not here to talk about me. Yeah, we might talk about me. If you want to talk about me and throw questions at me, I'm an open book. But let's start with you. Who are you, where you're from, and how'd you get involved in your non-for-profit? So please, just introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, so I'm from Western Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. I grew up as an outdoors kid. I was spent many weekends on my family's property where we had a cabin. I think we're just over 50 years now that we've had that in the family, and loved being outside, just messing around, being a little boy playing in the mud. Always fun times there. And eventually, got into playing baseball, which I played through college, and the outdoors took a little bit of a backseat, but they were always there. Once I graduated from college with a teaching degree, got a job as a teacher, started coaching high school baseball. Eventually that got pretty tiring, and decided I wanted to go back into the outdoors. So I'm still a teacher, but I've been a hunter for 23 years now. So, I enjoy that activity, right? I enjoy doing that, but there's always something more that I wanted to do. Land prices are crazy expensive, and I don't have the income to purchase land like my grandfather did. He bought, those 70 acres for $325 an acre, I think it was.
Wow.
And if I could find land at that price, I'd be buying it up.
I'd buy it up. Screw it. I'll buy an acre. This is just to have.
Yeah. Now with prices, at minimum around $5,000 an acre, I just don't have the income for that. Yeah. I decided I wanted to find a way to give back, to the outdoor space. And, if I can't afford to buy more land, I can improve the land I have. And that is what really sort of started the idea of Conserve the Wild. Instead of, in the area I am, I wouldn't say, it's not a city. Like, I don't live in a city. Right. I live in what would be considered like suburbia, which is okay for now. But, I see the sprawl that Americans in the United States are doing. We're just expanding our cities bigger and bigger, and our suburban areas bigger and bigger. And it, for the most part, has pretty much no regard for wildlife or for ecology. And that's where Conserve the Wild stemmed from, was just, hey, what if we can do things a little bit smarter, and we can try to be a little more sustainable and try to keep some of these areas for wildlife. And so that's, we have two main goals at Conserve the Wild. One of them is to educate the public. I mean, I'm a teacher, so hey, let's educate the public about conservation. And we're in the process of developing some high school and middle school curriculums about conservation that will be donated free at no cost to teachers that are interested in teaching that curriculum. And then really the main big picture idea that we have is trying to raise capital so that when an old farmstead or a wooded area, goes up for sale or might go up for sale, that instead of, some developer buying it, we would buy it. We would manage that property based on the most conservation need, for wildlife there, and allow, people from the public to come and enjoy it, just like I get to enjoy the property that my family purchased.
Yeah. So conservation is obviously, it's something very important. But I didn't picture you being from Western Pennsylvania. I'm not gonna lie, I pictured you being from the Upper Northwest, someone like an Oregon or Washington State, or even whatever Montana. I think Montana's next to Oregon, right? Like that kind of, because I think of conserving the wild. I think of the heavy forested areas. Like I didn't realize that is Western Pennsylvania that heavily forested. I mean, there's deer everywhere, and elk are everywhere. But is Western Pennsylvania, it's like that? Is that really like what needs to be conserved in Western Pennsylvania?
Oh man, we have, I think it's over 150 species of concern. There's a couple different types of bats, for example, salamanders. There's all kinds of. It's heavy coal mining country up here. Not as much mining anymore, but there was a lot of strip mining, right?
Yep,
yeah.
City.
So we have a lot of fish species that are either extirpated or still under threat because of runoff from mines and things like that. It's funny. A lot of people, I would say that a lot of people are like you and think, it's mostly people out west that are interested in the outdoors, or interested in, conservation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
As I've been jumping in more and more with conservation organizations, I find that there are a lot of people into conservation that are originally from, they might not still be in that area, but are originally from Pennsylvania and Michigan. And both of those areas are hugely wooded areas, especially, the UP of Michigan, nothing but big woods. The vast majority of northern Pennsylvania is still big woods. We have a national forest, actually not far from our family property. The Allegheny National Forest is there. And actually Pennsylvania itself actually translates to Penn's Woods, the original owner of Pennsylvania. It was his woods that he had. So yeah, there's still, the southern portion of the state, especially around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it's been transformed greatly over the last 50 years or so. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of outdoor experiences that you can have in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, not to be honest, the Northeast, has like the Appalachians, all those mountains, right? Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, all of upper New England is all, that's like where I'm from. I'm from Massachusetts. But all of up there, it's all nature. It's all woodland. So what's like one of the hardest parts of running a conservation, save the forest kind of organization? Do you see the most hurdles from government? Do you see a lot of hurdles from like other organizations like a PETA, or just a lot of hurdles from just regular old people who just don't understand?
I think there's sort of two aspects, and they sort of stem from really one aspect, and that's people. People just, unless you grew up in a rural setting or you grew up in a family that made going into the outdoors a priority, it's not top of mind for you to think about. So, trying to, and because of that, that means there's a smaller pool of people that do, like, I'm not saying that most people don't care about conservation, but the people that are really passionate about it, it's a small pool of people. And there are a ton of different conservation organizations out there, that are all sort of vying for their dollar, their donations, their volunteerism. So that really sort of makes it the hardest to be a new nonprofit that's starting out, is really getting enough support to be looked at as being viable on a political scale, or on a larger scale than just your sort of backyard.
Yeah, and it's honestly the people who really are all gung-ho about it and very much invested into it. If you ask most people in New York City, it's not going to be people they expect. I bet they're not going to say that many hunters care about, no, they don't care about the environment. They just want to kill things, right? But no, a lot of hunters, specifically in Africa, you hear stories a lot where, they have to kill this rhinoceros because it's terrorizing, the local village or community there, and they have to do it. But if they want to go kill it, they have to pay for it, and all the money they pay for it goes to conserving the wild. So people just that's just a thing I know that I know a lot of people just don't know. How correct am I on that?
You're correct. It makes absolutely zero sense, right? In order to save animals, you have to
kill them.
Kill some of them, right? And that's where a lot of people get hung up. They look at the act of hunting as this terrible, terrible thing when you look at this one individual animal. right? Yeah. And as a hunter, I actually get zero joy in the act of pulling the trigger or releasing an arrow. Like that's, while I'm accomplishing the goal, I'm not ecstatic about that. Right. But I look at it sort of pragmatically in that, yes, this one animal had to die, but the, hundreds or thousands or millions in the case of white-tailed deer, they're going to benefit because that's then more food for them. And then, using that one animal every way that I possibly can to, sort of make its death a little more worthwhile, by consuming the meat, things like that. It makes it a little more palatable in your mind, as you go through it. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit of when you pull the trigger, there's definitely, remorse is the wrong word. I won't say I feel remorse, but the weight of the decision that you just made, it hits you. And then, okay, now there's work to do. I got to make sure, I do what I need to do to find the animal and use as much of it as I possibly can.
I mean, it's got to be a thrill, though. I mean, come on, like after you hit it and like, you take that, you got to be like, oh yeah, right, nail. Like, there's got to be some sort of like, hitting a hole in one. Even in mini golf, I get excited for a hole in one in mini golf. I've never been hunting, but I can imagine there's some kind of thrill of, you're out there for sometimes days at a time. And you're a hunter. I'm sure there's sometimes you come back empty handed. So when you actually just get it, you got to feel something.
Yeah, I mean, there's excitement. Again, it's more about the fact that you accomplished a goal.
Yeah.
Not the fact, like, it's excitement. Like, I'm a big archery hunter. So, when I release an arrow and it hits the mark where I want it to, I'm excited regardless of whether if it's an inanimate object like a target or if it's, a white-tailed deer. Yeah, I'm excited that I made a good shot. And I'm excited because I know if I made a good shot, that's going to be less suffering for that animal. Mm-hmm. But as soon, especially if it would fall and die where I can see it, you feel bad. There's a little bit of like, okay, like I just did that. That was because of me. Now, I think for me, it's easier for me to wrap my head around that decision because I teach culinary classes to high school students. And, as a society, we have never, as a species, as the human population, we have never been more removed from where our food comes from as we are today.
Right.
And there's the only way you could get any closer to taking part in every process of obtaining food than hunting would be to garden and own and be vegan. So I look at it as if I'm going to eat meat, I want to procure that meat myself. I don't want that sanitary approach of just walk into the grocery store and grab this meat that's in plastic wrap. I want to know where it came from. I want to know how it was handled the entire way through.
Yeah, I mean, like when I tell people like one day I want to go hunting, like even like my mom, she's like, "How? What? Why?" Like it's like you get a lot of that, but it's like no, like for me, it's not because I want to do it because I want to experience what it's like to literally catch and eat your own food, and also kind of just go back to what's literally ingrained in all of our DNA from thousands of years of evolution. I want to tap into that, and it sounds really hard and really challenging. Will I ever go hunting? I don't know. Probably not. But it's something I say I want to do, and one day, I hope I get the chance to do it. So what is the main reason why you hunt, and how often do you hunt?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. That's a question that took me, I think, 45 minutes in a podcast to articulate. Why do I hunt? Everything from food, right? I eat everything that I shoot, whether that's pheasants or turkey or white-tailed deer. If it's not for food, there's, some camaraderie there with friends and family. I grew up in a hunting family. My grandfather hunted, my father hunted, my great grandfather hunted. So there's some tradition to it. There's also just the knowledge that I'm helping conservation. Like I look at the North American model of conservation, and right in there, it says, that hunting is a tool to accomplish conservation goals.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that I am utilizing that tool to help the state, in this case, Pennsylvania, manage the deer population or turkey population, whichever species I'm hunting there. I do it also to connect. I think to sort of recharge and reconnect, connect to nature. I mean, we're connected 24/7 to our phones. I get work emails at 2:00 in the morning, that wake me up. I don't respond to them, but I get them. It's a way that it's an activity that it's acceptable for me to put my phone in my pack, not look at it, and just experience what nature is. Could I do that with, photography instead? Yeah, I could. But it doesn't have the same social ramifications that I'm used to. So, hunting is sort of the way to do it. How much do I hunt? If you would have asked me this question last year, I would have said a lot.
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
And that actually wasn't pandemic related.
Okay.
It's so ingrained in my family that, and I enjoy it so much. And with my schedule, I was hunting, 2 or 3 afternoons a week. And then on every Saturday that once hunting season came in. So I think, over the last 5 years, I'd say I'd average probably around 20 to 30 days a year of actively hunting, which for most people is a lot. My wife and I just had a baby over the summer. So this year, thanks. Which is great. We're both super excited. However, from a hunting aspect, it's gone down a little bit, right? So by this point in the year, I probably would have been out maybe 7 or 8 days. I've been hunting 3.5 days. So it's already cut it in half, and I expect it to cut even more into that, which is for a good reason. So I hunt probably more than most of the average hunters, but unfortunately this year it's a little bit less.
So how often do you how early, like in your child's age, you're gonna have it, eating like the meat that you hunt and that you cook?
I'm not an advocate of giving someone a piece of venison, for example, and not telling them it's venison until afterwards. I don't look at that as positive impacts. I will gladly cook up venison for anyone who seems interested. I do that for some coworkers, just to try to show them. Honestly, it's what one of the big names in the hunting industry is Stephen Ranella. It's something he's dubbed as venison diplomacy. Right, get people to be okay with, even if they don't want to hunt, get them to be okay with hunting by showing them how good the food can be. Yeah. So I'll do a lot of that. For my son, I don't know. I mean, he can start eating solid foods around 6 months. So I'd say probably around 1 or so. And really, it's going to be 1, maybe 2. I don't know. It's going to be one night I'm going to be cooking it, and he's going to act like he wants some. And if he wants to try, if he's indicating to me that he wants to try it, I'm going to let him try it.
Yeah, give him a nibble. I can only imagine like your typical diet. It's probably much healthier than most people's, because most of your food, I mean that, even like even if you eat a lot of red meat, like red meat's healthy for you. Too much of it might point out a good thing. I wouldn't recommend the carnivore diet, but that like a hunter's lifestyle, they're probably very conscious of their diet. Or you just like most Americans, who's like, out to the store, getting some steaks, some burgers, and extra cheese.
Yeah, I mean, listen, all that junk food stuff, right? Like, I don't eat fast food, and that comes from my sort of culinary nutritional background, and that started back when I was in college and realized like how bad it was for you. I was an athlete. I was trying to be clean with my diet. My diet has definitely gotten worse as I've aged. I'm more about convenience now. Yeah, but yeah, I would say probably, I mean, my family, we have some big gardens at our home. So we do a lot of canning. We have a lot of vegetables when they're in season. I try to use venison as much as I can in place of beef. I try to use pheasant as much as I can in place of chicken. Same thing with wild turkey. I would say it's probably healthier than the average. No, it is definitely healthier than the average American. But I'm not going to sit here on a high horse and be like, oh, I'd have the healthiest diet ever just because I hunt. There's still a little too much convenience in there for me.
And that's fair. Hey, Doritos still exist out there in Western Pennsylvania. But let's talk about someone like a Teddy Roosevelt, right? Now, he was known as like the nature president, right? Like I believe he made national parks a thing. I could be wrong on that, but like stuff and laws he passed and stuff that he stood for. Do those still stand today? Like, how important is something that Teddy Roosevelt did way back when still relevant to today?
Oh man, Teddy is my hero. If he would run, if he was still alive and running for president, I would vote for him every single year that there's a presidential election. He was the typical president that not everyone, but a lot of people hated because he used executive action more than any one of his predecessors, and arguably more than most modern presidents. Yes, he created the first national refuge for birds, for wildlife. He created the first national parks. He created the Forest Service. He was the conservation president. And, we still have national parks. We have even more national parks. We have even more national wildlife refuges. We have national forests with the Forest Service still going strong. A lot of what he put in place, we have taken as sort of the foundation of what we're trying to build upon today.
Right. Is part of what you do at the non-for-profit, is part of it to get legislation passed for the wildlife? So how exactly do you conserve the wild? I mean, obviously there's stuff you can do, like, cleaning up trash and stuff like that, saving animals. Hunting is one of them we've already talked about. But is there even a step further you can go in terms of legislation?
Yeah, there could be. We're not set up for that. We're not set up for policy action. What we do advocate for, certain legislation that might be out there that would be beneficial to conservation. We'll let people know, like, hey, this is something good. Recovering America's Wildlife Act is one that's being considered now. And we, on our podcast, have, encouraged people to contact their politicians and let them know that they want them to vote yes for that. The National Grasslands Act is one that is looking for co-sponsors now. I think there's 125 in the House. At last I checked, and we've encouraged our listeners to contact the representatives and let them know that their representative should co-sign that bill. Because obviously the more co-signers you have, the faster it's going to move through legislation. When it came to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, that was a couple years ago, we advocated for that as well. But, as our status, we can't advocate for a specific political person. IRS bars us from doing that.
Yeah.
So we can't do that. And then we don't have the manpower. We're too small. We're not well funded enough to really go after policy. We leave that up to some of the bigger organizations, and they do a pretty good job of advocating for the average conservationist.
All right. So you have other basic principles that I found over at your website. You have wildlife is held in the public trust. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so those principles that you're seeing on our website, we base our mission off of those principles. Those principles are actually the principles of the North American model of conservation.
Okay.
So that was something that was developed. The North American model of conservation was developed by a man by the name of Aldo Leopold. He was from Wisconsin. He's basically the father of wildlife biology. So if you ever talk to someone that has any sort of wildlife biology degree, Aldo Leopold was the person who actually started that program at the University of Wisconsin. That was the first one ever. So we base our mission off of those principles. With wildlife held in the public trust, basically what that's saying is we will not look at wildlife the way that Europeans look at wildlife. In Europe, if the animal is on your property, you own that animal. And that's not the case in the United States. So in the United States, the wildlife is owned by each individual state. And the states are supposed to work together a little bit, right? Because animals, they don't know, they've never looked at a map, right?
They don't recognize state lines. Because I'm going to go Pacific Northwest. Like, if you have a certain herd of animals, up north in California that also border on Oregon. They go back and forth. Yeah, the states have to work together. Like, no duh. As long as it's not on fire.
Right. And, so, they don't know that, hey, I can't cross this line or I can't cross this road or whatever. Like, they go wherever they want. So it's states that own them. And it's states that set the regulations for hunting and for how to care for those animals, whether you can hunt them or not. And then whatever state you're in, then you have to abide by those rules, right?
All right. Then we have prohibition of commerce of dead wildlife. I'm assuming that's trophy hunting.
No, actually, it's not. Trophy hunting is fine, right? There are a lot of hunters in America that trophy hunt. When we think of trophy hunting, we think about like Africa paying.
You think of Cecil the lion.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
that dentist got his career run through the mud. Okay, what's your thoughts on that whole story of Cecil the lion? Because I have my thoughts. I want to hear yours first. I'm interested.
All right, so I am in support of each and every single legal hunter in the world. If you are hunting legally, I will support you until the bitter end. If you are the guy that shoots something that they are not supposed to, then you are no longer a hunter, you're a poacher. I am 100% against all poachers and will actively call out social media, in person, whatever. I don't care who you are. If you're a poacher, I'm calling you out on it. And I am not that person. That person does not represent me at all. I get that guy paid, upwards of $30,000 to go to Africa and shoot a lion. While that's not for me, I'm not going to do that. One, I don't have the funds to do that. And two, I don't have an interest in going to Africa to hunt any of those animals. I support trophy hunting in Africa because it does a lot of good for conservation and does a lot of good for the villagers that live over there as well. The problem with Cecil the lion was that Cecil the lion was living on a wildlife refuge that was closed to hunting. He had a GPS collar on, and this guy and his tracker, his guide, they call them trackers over there. They knew they weren't supposed to be over there. They knew that they weren't supposed to shoot that lion, yet he did it anyways because he was coming to the end of his hunt. That turned him into a poacher. Some people at the time wanted to argue that the poacher didn't know what he was doing because he doesn't live in Africa. How would he know? I have an issue with that because I went to Montana and hunted elk. I went to North Dakota and hunted pheasants. I knew where I was allowed to go. I knew where I wasn't allowed to go. Right. In Montana, I had a guide. The guide guided me, but overall, it's still my decision on whether I pull the trigger or not. The guide can't force me to. So there has to be some ownership on that person as well, even if you're just a guide or even if you're following a guide. So yeah, whatever, barring bodily harm, whatever happens to that guy, I'm okay with.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That's fair. I mean, I trophy hunting. I prefer traditional hunting, right? Hunting the feed, hunting to, like the hunting you do. I'm not necessarily opposed to trophy hunting as long as the answer to the question is, where's that money going? What's that money for? Like, if it's going to pay $100,000 to kill something because you want to kill it and just not do anything with it, it's like, okay, like, there needs to be a reason. Like, for me personally, legally it might be fine, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But like, for me personally, there needs to be a reason for why you are actually killing the animal. Like, you need a valid reason. And if you don't want public outcry, don't name the stupid thing. Don't name the animal. Because don't forget, Cecil the lion had a brother who also got paid to get killed. They didn't name him, and the media didn't care. So don't name the animals.
That whole term trophy hunting, it's a very gray area because there's friends that I have that would consider my hunting to be trophy hunting. The way
personal
I go
trophy,
out,
sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, but even
do you hang like the antlers or feathers and you stuff them?
I do.
You stuff them taxidermy?
One only because I've only shot one big enough that I would consider paying $250 to hang on the wall that way. Yeah. The idea is like I have friends that they consider themselves meat hunters. A meat hunter is someone that shoots whatever's legal for the meat, right? And that's great. That's one way you can go about hunting. That's awesome. On our property, we're trying to manage the herd a little bit better. We're trying to allow especially whitetail bucks to get a little bit older. Yeah. That way it's not nothing but young bucks that run around. And with that comes larger antlers. So some of my friends look at me and like, oh, that buck's legal, but you're not going to shoot it. You're trophy hunting. I look at it as selective hunting, right? I'm selecting which animals I'm willing to shoot. And it's from a management aspect. It's tough. There's a lot of gray area in that, even within our own community, of what's acceptable, what's not. I look at it as hunt your hunt. If you see an animal and you're like, I would be happy, that would satisfy my goals for my hunt, by all means, go ahead and shoot that animal. If it doesn't, because you think it's too young or it's too small, hey, that's fine too. I'm okay with that. Right? Yeah. As long as it's within the regulations and the rules and legality, and it's ethically, as far as like hunting ethics are concerned, as long as it checks all those boxes, sounds good to me. Your decision is good for me. That second principle, to go back to that second principle though, that prohibition on comments of dead wildlife. The reason why that's in there is because of market hunting. We can all think back to some of the crazy pictures from the late 1800s of like hundreds of bison dead across the landscape. Yeah. And that's what market hunting was. There were people that was their job. They would go out, they would kill hundreds of animals. They'd send hides back east, or they would send, oftentimes it turned into not meat, but mostly just the hides that they would send out east. And you would sort of make money on that. And that's not allowed now. So, I can't, if I shoot a whitetail, I can't sell the meat. I can't sell the antlers. I can't sell the hide. And that's to try to keep people from taking more than they're supposed to, because they're not making any money on it.
It's a different way of conservation. That makes a lot of sense. So it's like a restriction. Yeah. Cause I mean, like we could talk about hunters for like 3 hours. Maybe another day you can come on Talk with Tarashuk. We can talk about hunting, but no, I really do think they're a misunderstood group for the most part. There are definitely some assholes out there, and that's up for debate, or they're straight up assholes, but that's any community. But hunting is very interesting because it kind of, you have to think about it. It's like, oh, this is actual conservation. But let's pivot to the actual podcast. And the podcast is called Conservation Unfiltered. And I love the word unfiltered. So why start the podcast, and how'd you come up with that name?
I didn't want to start the podcast.
Why? Man, you're very natural on a podcast. I'm not just saying like I'm a good host either. I think you're very natural on a podcast.
Yeah, you know what? I listen to a lot of podcasts. I've been listening to podcasts for years. And when I first thought like, maybe I should start one, I reached out to a couple hosts that I had listened to, and they sort of told me like the workload, right? Like it's not just, hey, it is 40 minutes of work, right?
Yeah, it's a lot
more. And I thought, man, do I really want to spend the time doing it? I was like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. I'll give it 10 episodes. If I'm enjoying it, I'll keep going. I think this week, as we're recording this, I'll be releasing my 104th episode, I think it is. So, and then a bunch of bonus episodes. I really enjoy it. Why did I do it? I wanted to just increase, sort of the profile of Conserve the Wild, get out in front of more people and talk to people in the industry, right? People that are conservationists, other hunters, researchers, things like that. I decided very early on, I didn't want to take an approach that was like sort of pussyfooting around. Like I want to dive right in and talk about things that people within the hunting and conservation and fishing world are a little uncomfortable with, right? So for years, climate change has been, one of those sort of hands-off sort of topics that you don't talk about, because a lot of hunters and a lot of fishermen are conservatives, and we don't want to upset the conservatives because, by talking about climate change, that has switched, right? We now realize, I think a lot of hunters and fishermen are realizing that climate change is something that is affecting wildlife populations, right? So it's affecting the activity that you want to do.
We're overfishing the oceans for sure.
Yeah.
Like as a species, a lot of different countries just have no regulation on fishing at all. At least in this country, we do have some regulation. Don't get me wrong, climate change is a real issue, but the rest of the world, we're comes to conservation, animal life and wildlife, we're pretty far ahead.
Yeah. And it's great. But, even our streams are getting too warm for trout.
Colorado's running out of water. Like the Colorado Dam, like the whole Southwest, they're running out of water. I'm going to say that again. They're running out of water.
Yeah. I mean, it's a major issue, right? And I don't care how conservative you are. If you're a hunter, you're seeing, or a fisherman, like you're seeing the impacts on the landscape. So let's talk about it. Let's be unfiltered in the approach. I'm not filtering what I'm saying. Hunting numbers, numbers of hunters in the United States, the numbers themselves, like actual hunters, it's declined somewhat, but the real decline is the percentage of the population that hunts. We keep getting more and more people in our country, and we're getting, and less people are replacing the baby boomers who were really the main driver in hunting. Yeah. So, how can we get more people in there? There's a whole slew of demographics that are, I don't know if it's knowingly or unknowingly excluded from, this activity, the LGBTQ community, minorities, Hispanics, especially, right? There's a lot of people that frankly are racist and homophobic and don't want those people. I don't want those people around me doing what I want to do. I'm here to say, not only should we welcome them because they're people just like you and me, of course, but we should actually, invite them with us, because here's something, no matter what you agree or disagree with them with, here's something you can agree with them on. You both like doing the same activity. So you're going to have fun. You're going to make a new friend out of it.
Yeah. It's surprising how, once you actually get to know people and expose yourself to people, you just feel like, wow, they're just like me. We both hate the Red Sox just like everyone else. Right. Like, I mean, it is that simple, like I didn't even think of that. Like, you think of like a hunter, you think of as the go MAGA Republican crazy, not crazy person, that kind of person, Republican. It's like, no, there's probably a lot of liberals too that also like hunting, that like, save the trees to hippie people, right? It's like they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Listen, if you want to save a tree, shoot a deer, because deer are the reason why trees in Pennsylvania are not growing like they used to, because they eat the trees when they're young and they don't get as tall and as old as they're supposed to. So, we are getting to the point now where we're getting more women, more minorities, we're getting people into the hunting space. And we're even more than that. The reason why they're coming to the hunting space is because they're interested in conservation. Yeah. They like going for hikes. They like, doing raft trips, things like that. And then as they expose themselves more to the outdoors, then the next logical step for them is, well, I want to try hunting. Well, how do you start? Hunting is tough, right? It's very expensive. It's dangerous, right? So if you've never done it before, you don't know anyone else who does it, how are you going to do it? Yeah. The way to get more people involved is to invite them. One of the largest demographics of new hunters is actually vegans and vegetarians. And I actually align, a lot of my thinking as far as food is concerned. I align myself a lot with vegans and vegetarians. They don't want to eat, a lot of times they don't want to eat, meat because they don't agree with industrial farming practices.
Yeah. Factory farming is disgusting. It's gross.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah. So, their way of reducing the impacts of factory farming is by not eating meat. My way is by still eating meat, but not getting it from that factory farm, right? Harvesting it on my own. Right. Yep.
So, talk to me about the relationship between your business, even though it is not-for-profit, it's still technically a business, and the podcast, like that relationship, how one helps the other.
Yeah. So with Conserve the Wild, it helps the podcast because we have a main mission, right? Like we have a goal. So let's talk about what that mission is. Let's talk about the things that impact that mission on the podcast. The podcast helps the business because it helps a nonprofit because it drives interest, right? It drives people to check us out and see what we're about. And hopefully try to, also get them involved somehow, either financially or through some volunteer opportunities that had to get put on hold for the last year and a half. But hopefully we'll be getting those back up online here in short order.
All right. So what do you think your listeners, how do they bet? Okay. Who do you think would like your show and who would benefit from your content? That question's written really poorly. So like, what are your listeners? Who are your listeners, and what's the biggest benefit they get from listening to your show?
Most of my listeners are 20 to 30-year-old men that enjoy the outdoors. And what do they get from it? I hope they get a little bit of entertainment, but more than that, I hope they're learning something, right, about whatever that topic is that week. It's always conservation specific somehow, but it changes week to week. And, this week we'll be talking about invasive carp. Last week we talked about sort of like alternative jobs working in and around national parks, not the park rangers, but all the people that support that. Right. So that maybe, a retiree I do have some older listeners, maybe a retiree decides, you know what, I'm going to go work part-time in a national park. Or, we have fishermen in Ohio that haven't had to deal with invasive carp, but they realize that they're making their way through the water systems towards Indiana and Ohio and places like that. So, hey, what can I do to get involved to try to help stop that spread of these invasive carp?
Yeah. So do you have any podcast inspirations? Because this is the first like conservation for a nonprofit podcast I've run across, right? So it's a very niche market. As you said, hunters are going down, but that's a good thing. For podcasting, that's a good thing. Niche is good. You can make money off niche. But like how crowded is the market for these podcasts? And is anyone out there else you want to shout out and who inspired you and, et cetera?
Yeah, there's not many. If you want to define it strictly conservation, there's not many podcasts out there conservation based.
That's good.
Trying to think, Backcountry Hunter and Angler, Hunters and Anglers, that's a conservation group. They have a podcast, Backcountry Blast and Cast, I think they call it, with Hal Herring. I love him. He has the perfect radio voice, and I love listening to his show. Most of my inspiration comes from sort of, I guess, hunting related shows. There are a ton of hunting related podcasts out there. And, I would love to be, up to Stephen Ranella at Meat Eater or Remy Warren doing work for Meat Eater, like those kind of guys. But Hal Herring is definitely the guy. Yeah. Podcast and Blast from BHA. That is definitely the sort of inspiration and where I hope to get to someday in the near future.
Yeah. Steve Ranella really is. Like, if you think of he's a Rogan guest, right? That's a lot of people know him. He's a Rogan guest. That's how I've heard of him. I've listened to all of his episodes, that's how I learned so much about hunting. Just listening to Steve Ranella's podcast and on Rogan. He's a fascinating guy. It's just like, I would love to talk to him. And I know way less than you do. I bet you would love to talk to him. But I would, if I talk to him, I listen to you talk to him first. I know what to ask and what not to ask. But so do you have any previous experience in broadcasting? Was it easier to learn to hunt or easier to learn to podcast?
Oh man. Both of them equally hard. Previous experience, no. I guess my only previous experience is that I'm a teacher, so I talk all day. So at least I'm used to conversing with people.
Yeah, that definitely helps. That definitely helps.
The number one fear of people is speaking in front of a group of people. Number two is death. People would rather die than speak in front of people. So I go against the grain in that aspect. So I think that helped, right? That helped me become a little more comfortable with it a little bit quicker. It was definitely for me easier to learn to hunt, but only because I couldn't start hunting until I was 12. And I was outside with my dad and my grandfather while they were hunting or while they were getting ready to hunt or after hunts. Like, I was always outside with them from the time I was, from the time I could walk. So I had years of experience outside before I even got to go hunt. So the actual act of hunting might have been a little bit easier for me in that regard.
So how is your podcast structured? And by structure, I mean, does it need to be within a certain time limit? Do you release on a certain day? Do you always have guests? Do you have guests and monologues? How do you structure your show?
I would say we're probably 95% guests and interview. I make sure to tell everyone that I am not the expert. I'm bringing the experts on. That's how I want to bring them information. Some of the things that I feel like I have a lot of information about: Allegheny National Forest, North American model conservation. I've done solo shows on that because I feel like I know that information well enough. But it's vast. The vast majority of them are guests and talking to other people. I like talking to other people, so that makes it more enjoyable for me. I try to keep the episodes around 45 minutes just because, we're talking, like I said, we're talking about a niche subject. So there's really only so long you can go into it until people start getting really bored, especially when you're talking to, an academic researcher or something like that. I release all the episodes on every Tuesday. If there's no technical glitches, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, sometimes can be pushed back as late as 10 a.m. if there's some technical issues that I've had from time to time.
So how do you find your guests?
Originally, it was a lot of cold calling. I would find someone that had a cool job or someone that wrote a cool article or something like that, and I would just shoot an email. And a lot of those people came on. I still do that from time to time. If I find something that is really piques my interest in something, that I read their article and then I read a couple more articles about it from someone else, I'm like, I'm going to go back to the original person and have them on. But now it's to the point where it's sort of like a tree, right? Like you get one guest and then they tell you about one or two other people, and then you talk to them and have them on, and then they tell you about one or two other people, and it sort of grows in that sort of branch. And that's really how most of the guests seem to be coming on, especially in the last 6 months or so.
So how much of a networking tool is the podcast? Like, do you use the podcast to network with your guests? And like, do you bring, obviously the first thing you want to do when you have a guest on is you want to have a great conversation, right? You want to get to know them. You want to know who they are, what they do, etc. But also podcasting is a great networking tool, especially for a business and especially for a nonprofit. So how successful are you? Like, do you convert your guests into people who work with you?
Yeah, I would say, since we're so new, I would say it's not as high of a conversion rate as it could be. People, anytime you're something new, people are a little standoffish about that. We don't have a national reach either, so that makes it tough. I've had some, guests on where people that really like them and listen to the episode, they're interested, but it's hard for them to come to a volunteering event in Central PA whenever they live in, California. Yeah, I would say, the networking it's gotten better over the years. As we've sort of grown a little bit, it keeps getting, the ball rolling down the hill keeps getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
We're trying to do as much organic growth as possible, and try to keep away from, get away from too much on the way of paid marketing. When it comes to an issue like conservation, you can't pay someone to care about conservation. They have to have that sort of internally. So, we're trying to get out in front of as many people as we can to spread our message, cast that net as wide as we can. Unfortunately, as big as the net is, the holes in the net are also pretty big, because a lot of people just they might be interested, but are they really, passionate about it enough to where they want to actually, take that next step and help out?
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely tough. I mean, nowadays it's hard to network with anybody, like, let alone just regardless. But if you have a guest, that a low conversion rate isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you still have good content. If you have a podcast, the most important thing is good content. Like, I tell people, like, after you finish recording a podcast, here's what we can do, et cetera, et cetera. We're doing to work with me. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes a guest is just like, I don't want to work with you, or I can't work with you, et cetera, et cetera. But you still have great content. And that's the fun of podcasting. So
yeah,
go ahead.
If I have a conversion of one person every 5 episodes, that's still one more person, right? So and that's just sort of the eternal optimist and positive person that I am.
Like, even a guest that's like, here's $5 donation. That's a win.
Mm-hmm.
That's a win. That's a win. Like, every podcast I do is a win, even if it doesn't convert, because it's just more content for you to put out there. It's more video for me to edit. It's more skills for me to update. It's another person I'm talking to. Like, I tell people all the time, I podcast as a business, but I also podcast for personal growth. It's like, it's like a reason why I would want to go hunting, for personal growth, to kind of click into that kind of thing. So, like, if I can talk to a hunter right? And like, try it. Like, I mean, okay, I can now go to another hunter if I ever meet one, and try and convince him to get a podcast. Like, it's easier. It's just reps. And that's something that's great about even with guests. Like, because eventually I want all these to be in person, like a Rogan does. All these, it's going to be much better in person. I like that we do this over Zoom. I like that I can put everything in my fancy schmancy graphics package, and I love. But it's going to be better in person. So I'm going to ask you, Jason, are your guests mostly in person, remote, or a fair mix?
Remote. I mean, I'm pulling people from all over the country.
Yeah.
I'm pulling people from, I've had a couple international people as well. So remote is really the only viable option that I have. It doesn't help that I don't have like a traditional studio either. Right. Which, if we could make a lot of money off of this, like Joe Rogan, and get a deal with Spotify, then, we're going to start flying people in. But, for now it's remote, but anytime I get the chance to do an in-person, this week I'm actually doing an in-person interview. I have some guests that are actually going to be a little bit closer to where I live. So I'm going to basically we're meeting halfway, and they just happen to be there. So I'm like, yeah, I'll do that drive to do it in person, because the quality is so much better when it's in person.
Definitely. Look, I do enjoy these remote interviews. It's different. It's a challenge. I don't interrupt as much like if we were in person. But that's just a fun flowing conversation. Like a podcast really is just a conversation, and the listeners are fly on the wall, shelling at the radio if they disagree. That's just how it works.
That's what I love about podcasts is you can make it whatever you want, right? Like you asked me how long my episodes are. I decided 45 minutes seems to work. You can make it 5 minutes. You can make it 2, Steve Ranella, Joe Rogan, they're doing hours at a time. That's great. That's what I love about it, is you can make it each episode whatever it is that you want.
So do you do video content?
No, we do not do video content. I am, I'm not good in front of or behind the camera. So, I have a face for radio. So this microphone is the best way for me.
Yeah, I got a face for radio and a voice for TV. That's just how it works. So who else is part of your podcast team? Are you a one-man crew? Do you do all the recording and editing and distribution yourself, or do you have people to help you out?
Yeah, I do. I would say 90% of it myself. I do have a coworker here that helps me out from time to time, recording some segments if we have some segment stuff, but the vast majority of it's done by me, which if I could farm out to someone else, I would do that in a heartbeat. I love the conversations. I love the pre-interview stuff. The editing and the promoting afterwards is not my cup of tea. I do it because you have to, right? Someday I hope to get to the point where I can have someone else helping, 100% with all that sort of post-production stuff.
Is that the biggest challenge you face today? The post-production stuff, like after it's done and it's getting it out there?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, most people have that same problem.
Yeah, and that's just because it's not my jam. Like, it's not what I want to do, right? Yeah. If I enjoy doing the post-production stuff, it'd probably be the easiest thing for me to do. But that's not me. I'd rather sit here and talk to you and, email back and forth, ahead of time and do all the pre-production stuff and everything. Like that's the kind of stuff that I find interesting, because I'm getting to know someone. I'm having a conversation with someone. Sitting down and listening to it and editing it up afterwards and then promoting it is just it. There's other people that are more passionate about doing that than I am.
Yeah. Well, I like the post-production. I like the editing. It can be very tedious. So for example, I'm going to listen to this interview 3 times. One, right now we're recording it. The second time is when I throw into the graphics package and put everything in the switches and the cuts and everything. And then the third time I go back and listen for social clips. And my average right now is 7 clips per podcast in over an hour. And those are all going to be released. I'm going to listen and watching those clips a million different times before they're released. So, I listen to it again, find a description. But like, it's tedious and it's annoying, but I like it. It's fun. And it's just like, I force myself to pay attention, and that's how I get my creative juices flowing. It's like, oh, I can bump up this video. How can I do it? How can I like add graphics to it? Okay, let me learn how to make this graphics package. Let's watch a few After Effects tutorials so I can figure out how to make this better. It's like that from the creative process is just much better for me. But I totally get it when it's like, I just want to do it and be done with it. So That's definitely a challenge. And, you know, for me personally, I hate the social media. So that's a challenge for me. But other than that, what do you still have any other challenge? What's the hardest part of doing the podcast?
Scheduling. I mean, without a doubt, it's scheduling, right? I mean, you're trying to get, you know, at minimum 2 people's, you know, with my format, right? This format, talking to someone else, you're trying to get 2 people's schedules to match up. That's tough to do. And that's if you're only having one guest on. There's, you know, this week, you know, there's going to be 3 guests on my podcast at the same time. So trying to match up that schedule sometimes is super, super tough, which is not fun. Sometimes it works out super easy, right? Like, hey, I'm available on these days at these times. They're like, oh, cool. I'll just, you know, this one works for me. Great. Awesome. Sometimes it's, you know, 20 emails later and you've finally scheduled something out, you know, 2 months later that you're finally going to have that conversation. And that conversation oftentimes is a little bit lacking because that creative juices you're talking about that I'm thinking about in the pre-interview stuff sort of wanes because I sort of forgot about it.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that we over here at APS managed to have a process where we cut the email back and forth down to nil, like as little as possible. Just, hey, reach out to me, intro email, just, you know, here's a form, fill it out, you go right back to my calendar. It's just easy. I mean, if you need something like that, we'll talk afterwards, but, you know, it's super easy. It's super helpful. And it's like, you know, shout out to Jared Laverne for making that possible. So what's my last question before we wrap it up? What's next for you? What's next for the podcast? What's next for the business? What's the goal?
Ooh, next for the podcast is bigger name guests. I celebrated.
That's a great goal.
Yeah, I celebrated the 100th episode with what I would consider to be my biggest get, which was the head of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. If you're a hunter in Pennsylvania, you know his name. You probably don't like him. So for him to come on my podcast, I thought that was huge. I want to keep going with that, right? Like I want to start getting more political figures. I want to start getting, you know, people that are a little bit bigger named on the show. And then for the business, it's quite honestly, it's trying to get some more corporate. The next step for us is getting more corporate sponsorships, more corporate partnerships. We have a few that donate, you know, enough basically to keep us running. With, you know, keep the website running, keep the podcast hosting fees going, that kind of stuff. I would like to get more or bigger so that we can actually start turning some of that money into more conservation work as opposed to, you know, just keep the lights on type stuff.
All right. Well, Jason, I wish you nothing but the best. I'm sure if you keep doing what you're doing and how you're doing it, I'm sure you'll be just fine. But before we go, last thing. You need to do some plugs, my friend. Let everyone know where they can find you, your website, how they can support the non-for-profit, your podcast, anything you want to plug and put out there to the world. The floor is yours.
Yeah, you can find us at conservethewild.org. That's our website. We have a sometimes blog posted on there. We have an all the time podcast on there, and that's how you can sort of learn the ins and outs and sort of our mission and what we're doing. You can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, conserve_the_wild. Had to be convoluted with that. Twitter is at conservewild, and then we have a Facebook page, Conserve the Wild, and then we have a Facebook group for the Conservation Unfiltered podcast. You can search those and just find us there. And then, you know, obviously, you know, subscribe and give us a shot. Give me a shot. You know, listen to the Conservation Unfiltered podcast, and I think you'll be surprised some of the different information you can learn that you might not think would interest you, but turns out is pretty interesting.
All right, Jason, thank you so much again. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my turn to plug all my stuff, all my shenanigans. You've heard this rant before, but one more time, not gonna hurt. My name is Will Tarashuk. That's T as in Thomas, Arashuk. You can find me and all of my other interviews for the Ambiguous Podcast Solution over at ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. All of my other guests for season 1 and the ongoing season 2 are there. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, one, you have to have a podcast. That's a spoiler. And reach out to me at will@apspodcast.com. It's APSPODCAST But don't worry, my friends, if you don't have a podcast and still want to be interviewed by me to talk about yourself, your business, whatever it is you do, and if I find you generally interesting, you're allowed on that podcast on Talking with Tarashuk. That's my other podcast that can also be found at Ambiguous Podcast Solutions.com. All the content from our podcast partners can be found over at ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com, as well as all the other services, including, production, distribution, marketing, CRM management, email, text message campaign, the whole shebang. They're all there. All of our partnerships, all the info is at ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. Again, I am Will Tarashuk. That is Jason Crighton. We will be back next week. Well, I will be back next week. Jason has another podcast. Go check that out. I'll be back next time with a brand new podcast, a brand new guest, and who knows what we're going to talk about. I don't know, but that's half the fun. We'll see you there.